Take all my loves, my love, yea, take them all. What hast thou then more than thou hast before? No love, my love, that thou mayst true love call. For mine was thine before thou hast this more. Then if for my love thou my love receivest, I cannot blame thee for my love thou usest. But yet be blamed, if thou thyself deceivest by wilful taste of what thyself refusest. I do forgive thy robbery, gentle thief. Though yet, love knows 'tis a greater grief to bear love's wrong than hate's own injury. The lascivious grace, in whom all ill will shows, kill me with spite. Yet we must not be foes.
The lady has returned to her refuge. When shall you two meet again?
My love is as a fever, longing still for that which longer nurses the disease, feeding on that which doth preserve the ill, uncertain, sickly appetite to please. Past cure, my father is now reason's past care, frantic, mad with evermore unrest. His thoughts and his discourses as madmen's are.
The one of works of ire and bitter woe, over Tagos' banks the nymphs of Tagus show. Flowery garlands from your ringlets torn, why, wandering wild, with trembling steps forlorn. The demon's rage you saw, and marked his flight to the dark mansions of eternal night. You saw how, howling through the shades beneath you, wrecked new horrors in the realms of death. What? Trembling tempests shook the thrones of hell, or rode through her caves, ye muses tell. The rage of baffled thought, and all the fire of powerless hate with tenfold flames conspire.
Be wise, hast thou art. Do not press my tongue-tied patience with too much disdain, lest sorrow lend me words, and words express the manner of my pity wanting pain. But suffer no more. I have decided. We shall wed tonight.
Thou art our Prince Peter, and shall be our king. Must you act so unkindly to your realm of people?
Call not me to justify the unkindness that thine cruelty lays upon my heart. Fetch Ignez and Friar's forward to me.
And thou be wedded to calamity.
Let those who are in favour with their stars, of proud titles and public honour, boast, whilst I, whom triumph of such fortune bars, unlooked for joy in that which I am most. Great princes' favourites, their fair leaves spread, but as the marigold, the sun's eye, they find themselves in their pride and fled. For with a word, they in their glory die. Then, happy I, that love and am beloved, where I may not remove, nor be.
Very well. I will make haste.
Okay, great. One of the scenes of Peter and Ignez, and I decided to start this off by showing you a scene because one of the things people ask me the most about is how can you make sonnets dialogue? And all of Carl's speeches were Shakespeare sonnets. So it was sonnet 40, 147, 140, 139, and 25. Most of Charles' speeches were actually Portuguese poetry translated. I think this is what's the beauty of poetry is that you can do so much with something that seems so little. And let's talk a little bit about sonnets and where do they come from. So sonnets usually comes from Italian poetic tradition from the 13th century. The most notable name is Petrarch. And what happened with sonnets is that it has mainly two lines of evolution, right? You have the Italian Mediterranean line, which is where the Portuguese sonnets come from, and then you have English sonnets, which is the Shakespearean sonnets. And you know, they have difference in style that mainly relates to how language works and how language sounds, because poetry is meant to be said out loud. And this is one of the reasons why I also think it works so well in drama, in dramatic performance, because poetry is all about rhyme, cadence, and how it actually sounds when you say it, right? And when you perform it. And the amazing thing about sonnet is that it is a formal type of poetry that is still used nowadays, right? You know, you still have contemporary poets who use sonnets, whilst you don't actually have like medieval troubadour poetry as current as sonnet poetry, right? Sorry, I am a rambly person, so please bear with me. But what distinguishes sonnets from other types of poetry at the time is also this introduction of a philosophy behind it. So in the Portuguese version of sonnets, you have three stanzas that have a question, and then you have the last three verses, which is a resolution to the question. And then the Shakespearean sonnets, you have three stanzas, and then the couplets that also summarize whatever it is that the author is telling you about in that particular sonnet. Plus, there is this idea of a narrative. So you can see the Shakespearean sonnets, they have a narrative in terms of the relationship with the lover, and not only that, but relationship with love, with fame, with fortune, with beauty, and everything that makes life wonderful. And this is one of the reasons why I decided to do to base my text in poetry, is that everything you can possibly say about the world can be found in poetry. And it can be found in Shakespeare, and it can also be found in authors that you might never hear or have heard about, like Luís Vaz de Camões, who is the Portuguese poet that is translated and used for almost half of the speeches in my play. With a narrative development, we can then develop a sort of a plot into the play. And the basis of the plot, in my case, is epic poetry from the Lusíadas, which is an epic poem, a little bit like the Ignez from Portugal. And I am so nervous, guys. Like, I am sweating here. It's just me. It's really, really hot in here. Because Portuguese poetry is also very particular in how it developed. It is like the English. It is a poetry that reclaims language. One of the stars of Portuguese poetry, the troubadours poetry, is to distinguish the Portuguese language from the Spanish language, right? And this is why this particular poet is so important, because it's the first time we have a major body of work that is in Portuguese and that is recognized elsewhere in Europe. And because this is, Luís Vaz de Camões is also a contemporary of Shakespeare, we have the same themes in his poetry, which is Shakespearean poetry that is, first of all, classical, because it's just the beginning of Renaissance and we are recovering classical history, right? But what then distinguishes it is the fact that Portugal is in the time of expansion by the sea. So a lot of poetry and a lot of literature at this time is about traveling. And I think it's also an important thing because we are in a current world where we are rethinking our legacies and rethinking our relationship to this period and time. So what does it mean to bring Portugal into Portuguese language and Portuguese poetry into the UK at this time of the century? And what does and how can that be squared? First of all, because of this imperialistic idea that we don't like anymore, and second of all, because Brexit. And this is what the play is also about, because Peter Ignez, it's based on a true story actually. It's based on a medieval king who was in love with a noblewoman from Galicia. She dies, everyone is sad, and then he goes on a civil war against his father because he killed his lover. So what is this? What is foreign? What is native? And how does that interlace itself in drama, in Shakespeare, in Camões, in poetry? And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to display and why I wanted to do it in this method. How can language be developed in dramatic purposes? How can you fashion psychologically interesting characters? How can you chart relationships? How can you support plot developments and explore attitudes and ideas through something that has already been written and has already been analyzed and has already been set in stone, so to speak. But that is the beauty of literature, and that is the beauty of poetry, is that it is alive. It is constantly changing. It is constantly gaining meaning, and it's constantly gaining meaning for yourself and for the world. And I think that's one of the great things about the experimental show of the festival is that it might not be the popular show, but it is a show that brings Shakespeare into the forefront in the sense like what does Shakespeare mean and how can we experiment with Shakespeare? Does directing Shakespeare mean having your actors be word perfect? Does directing Shakespeare mean you're recreating Elizabethan costumes? Or does it mean that you're creating a living relationship with an actor that is absolutely fantastic, amazing, and at the same time obscure for ourselves at this point in time? And how can we bring that legacy into our own and then give it back to the world, because you can't do anything just for yourself. You have to give it back to the world. And this is why I think poetry was a good mean of writing these plays, because a poem can mean so many things for so many people. And what I've written for this play how I use these sonnets for this way, for this particular scene. It's not a canonical way, but at the same time, what I've written in that script is not what Hal and Charlotte just did, or the idea that I had. It constantly changes, it constantly evolves, it constantly adds on in this plethora of love, enthusiasm, and care. So how can we adapt language? How can we transform language, and how can we present something in a new way? And how can a poem, an author, a story that is so quintessentially Portuguese can be translated into English? How can an English audience feel the same way that I felt when I was 14 and reading this in my Portuguese GCSE preparation exam? How can the ensoulment of the story that has been happening for centuries and centuries also be translated into you, who know nothing about me and probably know nothing about Portuguese history or poetry? And again, language. Because by starting with the Shakespeare, which is something that is known to all of you and familiar and cherished, you can then make that bridge into the other. So we start with ourselves and we go into the other always. And this is also one of, and I know this is all very deeply personal and probably not the most theoretically interesting way of all times, but and I will say this over and over again, is how can theatre, how can anything that you do be an endeavor of love, and how can you transmit that into an audience so they can love as much as you do? I think for me that's the basis of all craft and everything that we do in life, basically. They're using these two poetic traditions in parallel to each other, so they can connect and converse and dialogue will hopefully, I hope, then create a dialogue between myself and the audience, between the text and the audience, between Peter, who was alive in the 13th century, and the audience, as much as it does in Portugal. And why does that matter? You know, in the end, it doesn't really matter. In the sense that maybe not everyone is that interested, but as my literature teacher used to say, there are like 10 stories that are to be told in the world. The rest are just adaptations. And this is a story that I would like to tell, and I would like the audience to listen. It is a story about love, morality, loyalty, duty, cruelty and tenderness, strength and self-sacrifice. And this all can be then translated into proper words by poetry, by Shakespeare, by Hamlet. And isn't that absolutely amazing? How incredible is that? So what I guess my main point is in regards to all of this rambling is that please watch my show. Is that poetry, and sonnets in particular, because of its exceptional position in a literary tradition can be used as, in a dramatic context, as to actually transmit themes like the strain between private and public life, to transmit struggles and moral choices, and it can, depending on how you acted and depending on how you adapted, be given a voice, a particular voice. And of course, this is just one interpretation, there are many. And it doesn't mean there is a right one. And going back to this point, it works so well in this play because Shakespeare's sonnets are most and foremost a language of love. It does have other themes, they do have other themes, right? But it is mainly and particularly about love. And it's all kinds of love. And it's spoken to and by lovers. And it is, and is still used today to express this amazing and wonderful feeling that hopefully we all have felt and feel and will continue to feel. So how can one of the greatest love story of all be told through Shakespearean sonnets? Well, I hope Cal has just shown it to you, because he can. Yeah, I'm going to stop talking now before everyone gets absolutely bored.